Married for 3 years, Adrian had hated me for 3 years. Our last argument occurred after a car accident. To protect him, I hit my head and remembered nothing upon waking. In the ward, he looked at me with undisguised disgust and relief in his eyes. Pointing to his comatose vegetative brother on the adjacent bed, he coldly said to me, "That is your husband. See clearly, and don't bother me anymore." Thus, I began to watch over my vegetative husband day and night, seeking medical advice for him, hoping he would wake up. Even when he needed a kidney transplant, I signed the donation agreement without hesitation. On the night before the surgery, Adrian rushed in like a madman, gripping my wrist tightly, roaring with bloodshot eyes, "You dare to die for him? Look at me. I am your husband. How long are you going to pretend to have amnesia?" I opened my eyes to the pure white hospital ceiling above. Adrian stood by the bed, his handsome face filled with undisguised disgust. He pointed to the man on the adjacent bed, covered in tubes with eyes tightly closed, his voice devoid of any warmth. "That is your husband. Evelyn, see clearly, and don't bother me anymore." Thus, I became Evelyn, a pitiful wife deeply in love with her vegetative husband. I began to stay by my husband Colin's side day and night, learning to wipe his body and massage his stiff limbs. Adrian would come occasionally, but he never looked at me, only staring at the data on the monitors. Today, the ward door was pushed open, and a woman in a Chanel suit entered, her perfume overwhelmingly strong. She was called Vivian, Adrian's childhood sweetheart. She glanced at me as if looking at a cheap ornament, then walked straight to Adrian and linked her arm with his. "Adrian, I heard Colin needs care here, so I came to check." "Oh, who is this?" Her gaze fell on me again, with scrutiny and contempt. Adrian said indifferently, "Caregiver." Vivian let out an enlightened "oh," drawing out the sound. "So it's the caregiver." I thought it was some clueless poor relative trying to climb connections. She covered her mouth and laughed uproariously. "Sorry, Sister Evelyn, it's been so long, I mistook you for a nanny auntie for a moment." She said sorry, but there was no trace of apology in her eyes. "But no wonder, where did you get these clothes from? Some vegetable market?" "They're all pilling. Although our Gu family doesn't lack money to hire caregivers, dressing like this is too embarrassing for our family." I looked down at my cotton t-shirt and said nothing. It was my most comfortable piece of clothing. Seeing me silent, Vivian found it boring and took out an exquisite thermos from her bag. "Adrian, this is bird's nest soup I stewed myself for you. You've been too tired lately, you need to nourish yourself." She unscrewed the lid, and the aroma instantly filled the entire ward. She scooped a spoonful, thoughtfully blew on it, and fed it to Adrian's mouth. Adrian did not refuse and naturally opened his mouth to drink. Vivian smugly glanced at me, her look as if saying, "See? This is his real treatment." She suddenly seemed to remember something and looked at me. "Hey, Evelyn, have you eaten? You look so thin, like a stick." "Well, people like you probably haven't seen such good bird's nest in your lifetime." As she spoke, she actually scooped a spoonful and handed it to me, with a condescending smile on her face. "Come, taste it? Consider it a gift from me. Don't be polite, eat up. If you can't afford meals, don't force yourself and embarrass us." Her hand tilted, and the scalding bird's nest soup spilled directly onto the back of my hand. Intense pain struck, and I quickly withdrew my hand. The back of my hand quickly turned red. "Oh no!" Vivian screamed exaggeratedly, but not looking at me, instead nervously grabbing Adrian's arm. "Adrian, are you okay? Did it scald you?" "It's all my fault, my hand slipped." She looked tearful, as if she had suffered a great injustice. Adrian frowned, pulled away from Vivian, and finally glanced at me. That glance was not concern, but deeper disgust. "You can't even dodge a bowl of soup, what else can you do?" After saying that, he took a tissue and carefully wiped Vivian's hand, which had no scald at all. Vivian hid in his arms and cast a victorious, malicious smile at me. I looked at my red and scalded hand, then at them. I said nothing, just picked up the nearby water cup and went to the water dispenser. I filled it with boiling hot water. Then, I walked to Vivian. Under her and Adrian's stunned gaze, I slowly poured the water over her expensive, meticulously styled head. The hot water flowed down her hair, soaking her designer suit. Ah! Vivian let out an ear-piercing scream. I calmly watched her disheveled appearance and threw the empty paper cup into the trash bin. Adrian reacted, pushing me away and roaring, "Evelyn, are you crazy?" I staggered from the push, hitting the wall, and a dull pain came from the back of my head. I held the wall, looking at the furious Adrian and Vivian crying in his arms. I didn't look at him, my gaze fell on the motionless man on the bed behind him. Then, I softly said, "You dirted my husband's ward." Adrian's expression froze. He probably never expected me to say that. Vivian's crying paused, then became more shrill. "Adrian, listen. What kind of attitude is this? She dared to hit me. My face, my hair, this is the style I need for tomorrow's banquet." She sounded like a cat whose tail was stepped on, sharp and aggrieved. "Just a caregiver, how dare she treat me like this? Look at her, like a shrew, how can such a person take care of brother Colin?" Adrian's face was so dark it could drip water. He walked toward me step by step, his tall figure exuding immense pressure. "Evelyn, apologize." His voice was cold, a command not to be questioned. Leaning against the wall, I looked up at him. "Why should I apologize?" I asked. "She first polluted the air here, then scalded me. She didn't mean it." Adrian's voice carried impatience. "I didn't mean it either." Mimicking his tone, I replied expressionlessly, my hand slipped. These words were like a slap, fiercely hitting Adrian and Vivian's faces. Vivian's crying choked, looking at me in disbelief. Adrian's chest heaved violently, the anger in his eyes almost burning me. "Evelyn, don't push your luck." "Who is really pushing their luck?" I retorted, "Mr. Adrian, you paid me to care for your brother, not to be a punching bag for your confidant. If you think I'm not doing well, you can fire me. If you think I hit your person, you can call the police. You." Or, I interrupted him, my gaze passing over him to Colin on the bed again, "You can ask my husband if he agrees to you bullying his wife like this." "Shut up." Adrian finally exploded, grabbing my shoulders, "He is not your husband." "I am." After roaring this, the entire ward fell silent. Even Vivian forgot to cry. Adrian himself was stunned, looking at me with complex eyes. I sneered inwardly. What is this? A schizophrenia scene? It was you who pointed to Colin and said he was my husband. Now you're jumping out saying you are. Adrian, what cliched CEO chasing wife drama are you acting out? Unfortunately, I'm not your audience. I ignored his loss of composure and gently broke free from his hand. Mr. Adrian, you might be tired and need rest. I said calmly, please take your friend and leave, don't disturb my husband's rest. My words were like a basin of cold water, extinguishing all the emotions that had just risen in him. His eyes shifted from shock and panic back to cold disgust. Good, very good. He gritted his teeth, saying word by word, Evelyn, you'd better never recover your memory. Otherwise, you'll regret it. He pulled up the still dazed Vivian and slammed the door out. The ward finally quieted down. I walked to the bedside, looking at Colin's pale face. This face was 70% similar to Adrian's but without Adrian's coldness and aggression. I extended my scalded hand and gently touched his fingers. Look, your brother is going crazy again. Fragmented images flashed in my mind. That was when we had just married, and Adrian didn't hate me this much yet. Once when I had a high fever, he clumsily took my temperature and used an ice towel to cool me down. He would sit by the bed, looking at me, and whisper, Evelyn, why did you have to marry me? At that time, I thought his coldness was just poor expression. I smiled and said to him, because I love you. After hearing that, he was silent for a long time, then got up and left. From that day on, he came home less and less. Until Vivian appeared, the last trace of warmth in his eyes vanished completely. It turned out it wasn't that he was bad at expressing, he just didn't express to me. It wasn't that he didn't understand gentleness, his gentleness didn't belong to me. A familiar dull pain came from my chest. I withdrew my hand, picked up the nearby nursing record book, and started today's entries. The scald on the back of my hand burned painfully, reminding me of what had just happened. At that moment, a nurse came in. She looked at the empty ward, then at me, and whispered, "Miss Evelyn, Mr. Collins' attending physician is looking for you. Please go to the office." My heart sank. Has his condition changed? The nurse's expression was somewhat grave. She nodded. The doctor said the situation is not good. He may need a kidney transplant surgery as soon as possible. When I entered the doctor's office, Adrian and Vivian were there too. Vivian had changed into clean clothes, her eyes red, leaning on Adrian's shoulder and sobbing. Adrian looked grave. Seeing me enter, he just gave a cold glance and looked away. The attending physician Raymond, a man in his 50s, pushed his glasses and gestured for me to sit. "Miss Evelyn, you're here." I nodded and sat in the chair opposite him. "Dr. Raymond Collins, my husband, how is his condition?" Dr. Raymond sighed and pushed a report in front of me. "Mr. Collins' kidney function is rapidly failing. This is our biggest concern. Currently, the only way is to find a suitable kidney source quickly for transplant surgery." My heart sank bit by bit. "Is the chance high?" "We will immediately match in the National Organ Donation Database, but as you know, waiting for a suitable kidney source takes time and luck." Dr. Raymond paused. "The best way is still for immediate family to undergo matching tests, which have a much higher success rate." As soon as he finished, Vivian lifted her head from Adrian's arms, tearfully grabbing Dr. Raymond's hand. "Doctor, take mine. I'll match. I grew up with Brother Colin, we have the best relationship. As long as it saves him, I'll do anything." Her words were said with genuine emotion, as if she was the great woman sacrificing for love. Adrian supported her shoulders, his voice carrying a touch of emotion and heartache. "Vivian, don't do this, your health is poor." "No. For Brother Colin, I'm not afraid of anything." Vivian cried, "Adrian, let me go. I can't watch Brother Colin have an accident." Dr. Raymond looked at them, then at me, his expression somewhat awkward. "Miss Vivian, we appreciate your intention. But matching requires strict testing, it's not just based on emotions." Adrian looked at the doctor, then arranged the test immediately, at the fastest speed. His gaze turned to me, with a hint of warning and contempt. "You, go too." He wasn't asking for my opinion but issuing a command. As if my existence was to serve as a foil for Vivian, so she wouldn't be too embarrassed if the matching failed. I didn't argue, just calmly nodded. "Okay." The matching results came out quickly. Adrian, no match. Vivian went with great fanfare, returned crying, and the result was also no match. She held the report, crying heartbrokenly in Adrian's arms. "How could this be? Why? Adrian, I'm so useless, I can't save Brother Colin." Adrian held her, softly comforting. "It's not your fault, Vivian, you've done your best." They were like protagonists in a deeply moving stage play, and I was the superfluous audience below. I took my report and quietly left alone. In the evening, when Adrian was not there, I found Dr. Raymond. I handed him my report. "Dr. Raymond, this is mine." Dr. Raymond took it, looked carefully, and showed a surprised and delighted expression. "Miss Evelyn, your matching is highly compatible." This result was within my expectations. Back then, the reason I could smoothly marry Adrian was because the old man found out my blood type was special, the same rare Rh negative as the Gu brothers. The old man said this was fate. Now it seems more like a prearranged ill-fated relationship. "Dr. Raymond," I looked at him and said word by word, "I am willing to donate my kidney to save my husband." Dr. Raymond stood up excitedly, "Great. Miss Evelyn, you really are. But I have one condition." I interrupted him. Go ahead. I hope this matter is not told to anyone. Especially Adrian. I looked at him firmly. Just announce externally that a suitable kidney source was found in the organ donation database. Dr. Raymond was stunned. Why? This is clearly your credit. No, why? I don't want to explain. If you can't agree, then pretend I wasn't here today. Dr. Raymond looked at me and finally nodded heavily. Okay, I agree. The donation agreement was prepared quickly. I took the pen and signed my name in the donor column, Evelyn. I wrote this word with extra force. After signing, I walked out of the office but bumped into a solid chest at the corridor corner. It was Adrian. He held a file, probably just from the company. Seeing me, his brows furrowed immediately. What are you doing here? I hid the agreement behind me and shook my head. Nothing, just walking around. His gaze was sharp, sweeping over my hand hidden behind. Take it out. Nothing worth seeing. I told you to take it out. His voice suddenly rose. He stepped forward, forcibly grabbed my wrist, and pulled out the agreement. When he saw the words Living Organ Donation Agreement and my clear signature below, his pupils suddenly contracted. His hand was shaking. You. He stared at me fixedly, his eyes filled with unprecedented turmoil. You're giving your kidney to him? I pulled back my hand and took the agreement. Yes. I answered crisply. Why? Because he is my husband. I lifted my head, staring into his storm-filled eyes. I love him, and I'm willing to do anything for him. I had said this to him before. On our first wedding anniversary. That day, he drank a lot, came back holding me, asking repeatedly why I married him. That's how I answered him. I love you, I'm willing to do anything for you. After hearing, he laughed, laughing until tears flowed. He said, Evelyn, you are the best actress I've ever seen. At this moment, I used the same words to answer his question about another man. The color on his face faded completely in an instant. He looked at me, his lips moving, but no words came out. Finally, he squeezed out from between his teeth, you really are hopeless. He turned and left hastily. His back had a sense of fleeing in panic. The surgery was scheduled in 3 days. In these 3 days, Adrian did not appear again. Neither did Vivian. The whole world was peaceful, making me feel unprecedented relaxation. Like a death row inmate heading to execution, I enjoyed the last peaceful moments. Every day, I wiped Colin's face and hands, read news to him, told jokes. Although he had no reaction, I spoke happily. Colin, do you know? Online now there's a popular term called cyber husband. I think you fit this standard perfectly now. No talking, no making me angry, and no need for me to bother with your family. When you wake up, I'll split half of the caregiver fee Adrian paid me with you, as your appearance fee. We two can be considered the best partners. As I said this, I laughed myself. Laughing and laughing, my eyes got a bit wet. On the night before surgery, the nurse came to do the final preoperative preparations for me. She drew my blood, prepped my skin, and instructed me to fast after midnight. Miss Evelyn, don't be nervous, Dr. Raymond is an authority in this field, the surgery will surely be successful. I smiled at her, I'm not nervous. I really wasn't nervous. Even had a trace of anticipation. Giving him the kidney, I repay the ill-fated debt of marrying into the Gu family. From then on, Adrian and I truly owe each other nothing. If I die on the operating table, even better. All settled. I can finally escape completely from this nightmare named Adrian. Late at night, I lay on the bed, sleepless. Colin on the adjacent bed breathed steadily. I looked at him, silently saying in my heart, Colin, after tomorrow, part of my body will belong to you. You have to live well. With my kidney, take a good look at this world. Just as I was about to fall asleep, the ward door was kicked open from outside. The huge noise was particularly piercing in the quiet night. I was startled and sat up. At the door stood a tall figure. It was Adrian. He reeked of alcohol, hair disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, tie pulled open. His eyes were bloodshot, like a beast cornered. He walked in step by step, each step like stepping on my heart. Evelyn. His voice was extremely hoarse. I looked at him, a foreboding feeling surging in my heart. What are you doing here? What? He walked to my bed, grabbed my wrist with force almost crushing my bones. I came to ask you, on what grounds? His eyes were full of bloodshot, staring at me fixedly. On what grounds are you giving my thing to someone else? I was baffled by his question. I don't understand what you're saying. Adrian, you're drunk, please leave. Don't understand? He sneered, taking out his phone with the other hand and slamming it in front of me. The screen was on, showing a file. A premarital physical report from 3 years ago. My name and his name were listed together. At the end of the report, there was a doctor's handwritten note clearly stating, female's kidney function naturally slightly below normal, single kidney. Recommend postoperative rest, avoid strenuous exercise and donation. Single kidney. I was born with only one kidney. Even I didn't know this. Back then, this report was sent directly to the Gu family. I had never seen it. Looking at those 2 words, my mind buzzed and went blank. If I have only one kidney, then tomorrow. I dared not think further. Adrian looked at my pale face, the madness in his eyes intensified. He leaned down, close to my ear, his voice like from hell. Evelyn, you want to die for him? You want to trade my life for his? You dare. His breath was hot, carrying strong alcohol, spraying on my neck. My whole body stiffened, unable to move. Look at me. He gripped my wrist tightly, as if to merge me into his blood and bones, roaring with bloodshot eyes, you dare to die for him? Look at me. I am your husband. How long are you going to pretend amnesia? The whole world seemed muted. I could only hear Adrian's heavy breathing and my own drum-like heartbeat. He finally knew. No, he might have suspected long ago, just waiting for a trigger. And my preparation to donate my only kidney became the fuse igniting this barrel of gunpowder. I looked at his bloodshot eyes, filled with anger, unwillingness, and a trace of panic I couldn't understand. I suddenly found it ridiculous. Pretend amnesia? I gently repeated these 3 words, then laughed out loud. Adrian, have you forgotten that this script was handed to me by you personally? My voice wasn't loud, but clearly reached his ears. His body suddenly stiffened. It was you, pointing to him, telling me that was my husband. I lifted my other hand, pointing to Colin on the adjacent bed. It was you who told me to see clearly and not bother you anymore. I'm just an obedient actor, trying hard to play the role you assigned me. I looked at him, word by word, crystal clear. Now, are you breaking the contract yourself? Mr. Gu, this doesn't fit your style. My words were like poison knives, precisely stabbing at him. The madness and anger on his face faded bit by bit, replaced by an ashen shock. The force gripping my wrist unconsciously loosened. He opened his mouth but couldn't make a complete syllable. What? I pulled out my hand, rubbed the reddened wrist he pinched. Do you want to say you regret it? Or that it was just a joke? Adrian, your one sentence decided how I lived these months. Now you want to overturn it all with another sentence? I supported myself on the bed edge, slowly stood up, and faced him. On what grounds? These words, I returned to him unchanged. He staggered back a step, as if hit hard by something. He looked at me, his eyes full of confusion and pain. I didn't mean that. He murmured, as if explaining, or convincing himself. Then what do you mean? I pressed step by step. Do you think me, as your wife, guarding by your brother's bed makes you lose face? Or that me dying for your brother dirties your wife Adrian's name? Stop. He suddenly growled low, interrupting me. He lifted his head, his bloodshot eyes full of struggle. Evelyn, let's go home. Don't stay here. He extended his hand, trying to pull me. Go home? I sneered. Which home? The empty house with only me, or the playground where you and Vivian flirt? I have nothing to do with her. He urgently defended. Whether or not, you don't decide, I saw it with my own eyes. I crossed my arms, looking at him. Adrian, put away this affectionate look, it makes me sick. Do you think that by rushing in now and stopping me from dying, you're the savior? Are you waiting for me to gratefully throw myself into your arms, crying, thank you, I won't dare again? Mimicking Vivian's coquettish tone, my voice full of sarcasm. Sorry, I'm not Vivian, I can't act this melodrama. Today I'll make it clear. First, donating the kidney is my voluntary choice, unrelated to anyone. Second, even if I have only one kidney, it's mine, I give it to whom I want. Third. I paused, looking at his instantly pale face, slowly saying the last words. Let's divorce. After saying that, I no longer looked at him and turned to lie back on the bed. My arm was gripped tightly from behind by him. I forbid it. His voice was hoarse, with a barely noticeable tremble. Evelyn, I can agree to anything except this. Forbid? I turned back, finding it utterly absurd. Adrian, on what grounds do you forbid? This 3-year marriage was like a lingering death for me. Now I don't want to play anymore, I want to leave early. On what grounds do you forbid? On the grounds that I am your husband. Husband? I laughed. A husband who pushed me to another man, ignored my 3 years of pain, and at my life and death moment only cared about his own face? Such a husband, I don't want. I forcefully shook off his hand, but he gripped tighter. In the tug, my phone on the nightstand fell. He bent to pick it up, the screen lit up, revealing my screensaver. It was a photo together. Me and Colin. I took it when the nurse wasn't looking, holding his head, our heads together. In the photo, he closed his eyes expressionlessly, and I smiled brightly. Adrian's movements stopped, he stared fixedly at the photo, as if the blood in his body was instantly drained. He lifted his head, looking at me, his eyes filled with destructive despair. He said nothing, just released my hand, turned, and walked out of the ward step by step. His back was desolate like a gambler who lost all bets. After Adrian left, the world returned to quiet. But my heart was in chaos. Congenital single kidney. This fact was like a boulder pressing on my chest. If Adrian hadn't burst in, tomorrow I would be pushed onto the operating table, then what? Die on it, or become an invalid needing dialysis to sustain life. For the first time I had such a real feeling about the word death. I'm not unafraid of death, I just feel living is more painful than dying. But now, I suddenly don't want to die. I can't just pathetically sacrifice my life for a man who doesn't love me and a husband I don't even know. Dawn broke. The surgery was naturally cancelled. Dr. Raymond came to see me, his expression complex. Miss Evelyn, your physical condition. Mr. Gu told me all. Sorry, it was our hospital's oversight not to carefully check your previous physical report. I shook my head. Not your fault, Dr. Raymond. As for Mr. Colin, I'll think of a way. I said. Adrian didn't come again. I was taken by him from that ward and confined to the villa where we lived when married. In the name of convalescence. He took away my phone, cut the internet, and had bodyguards guarding the door 24 hours. He wanted to turn me into a canary in a cage. 3 meals a day were delivered on time by the auntie. The dishes were abundant, all what I used to love. But I couldn't eat a bite. On the 3rd day, Adrian finally appeared. He had lost weight, looked haggard, with blue stubble on his chin, and his shirt wrinkled. He sat on the sofa opposite me, silently looking at me. After a long time, he spoke, his voice dry. Evelyn, let's talk. Nothing to talk about. I leaned on the sofa, too lazy to even lift my eyelids. If you're here to persuade me not to divorce, you can leave. Why must we divorce? He asked, his voice with a tired plea. Where did I do wrong? I can change. I finally opened my eyes, looked at him, finding this the funniest joke of the year. Where did you do wrong? I repeated, then laughed. Adrian, this question is like asking a fish what water tastes like. You are constantly hurting me with your indifference, disgust, and double standards. In these 3 years, where have you done well? He was rendered speechless by my question, his face pale. Vivian and I really have nothing. He tried to explain, that day, was an accident. Is it? I raised an eyebrow, then you arm in arm, drinking the soup she fed, her scalding me and you only caring about her, all accidents? I admit, I used to have prejudice against you. He worded difficultly, because I thought you and Colin. Thought what? I pursued, thought I was promiscuous, two-timing? Marrying you while seducing your brother? He didn't speak, which was tacit admission. So, this is the reason you hated me for 3 years? I stood up, walked in front of him, looking down at him. Adrian, you are a complete fool. You'd rather believe an outsider's instigation than the wife who slept beside you, sharing the bed for 3 years. Is your love, your trust, so cheap? No. It's not. He panicked, trying to grab my hand, but I dodged. Don't touch me. I stepped back, distancing. I find it dirty. His extended hand froze in midair. At that moment, the villa doorbell rang. The auntie went to open. At the door stood Vivian, dressed pitifully. Seeing Adrian and me in the living room, she was stunned, then her eyes reddened. Adrian. I heard Sister Evelyn is unwell, so I came to see her. I didn't mean to disturb you. She carried a fruit basket, looking understanding. Adrian's brows furrowed instantly. Who asked you to come? I'm worried about you, and Sister Evelyn. As she spoke, she tried to walk in. Get out. Adrian's voice wasn't loud but ice-cold. Vivian's steps halted, looking at him in disbelief. Adrian, what's wrong? Why treat me like this? I told you to get out. Adrian didn't even glance at her, just staring at me. But I laughed. I walked to the door, took the exquisite fruit basket from Vivian. Miss Vivian, thoughtful of you. I smiled gently at her, however, sorry to make you spend. Take this fruit basket back. As I said, I handed it back to her. After all, we're about to divorce. I won't need Mr. Adrian's money anymore. Sending such an expensive thing, I can't repay. As soon as I finished, Adrian and Vivian's faces changed simultaneously. Right, as if suddenly remembering, I took out a crumpled paper from my pocket. It was the divorce agreement draft I wrote last night and hid. Coincidentally, my lawyer will come today. Mr. Adrian, if you have no objections, sign it. I handed the paper to Adrian. That paper with the divorce agreement was like a death warrant in Adrian's eyes. His breathing stalled. Vivian was even more shocked, covering her mouth. Divorce? Sister Evelyn, how can you mention divorce at this time? Adrian has done so much for you. What has he done for me? I turned back, looking at Vivian, smile unchanged, locking me up, or having people monitor me 24 hours? Vivian was blocked speechless. Adrian's Adam's apple bobbed. He didn't take the paper, just stared at me fixedly. I won't sign. His voice squeezed from between teeth. Evelyn, I said, I won't divorce. Then see you in court. I took back the paper, folded it, put it in pocket. Adrian, you should know what going to court means for the Gu family's reputation and Gu Corporation's stock price. You dare threaten me? Dangerous sparks burst in his eyes. This isn't a threat, it's a notice. I answered calmly, I gave you a dignified resolution chance, you don't want it yourself. I ignored him, turned to the bodyguard at the door, see the guest out. Vivian wanted to say something but was directly escorted out by the bodyguard. Adrian stood in place like a statue, motionless. The living room fell into dead silence. After a long time, he spoke again, his voice with an almost pleading fatigue. Evelyn, what exactly do I need to do for you to forgive me? Forgive? As if hearing the biggest joke, Adrian, you destroyed my 3 years of love, marriage, youth. You trampled my true heart underfoot, crushed it. Now you talk forgiveness with me? I tell you, impossible in this lifetime. I'm not giving you a chance, he said, I'm investigating. The matters back then, what Vivian said, I'll check clearly. Give me some time. Why should I give you time? I retorted, let you check clearly, prove I'm innocent, then beg forgiveness, let us reconcile? Adrian, do you think all women in the world must revolve around you? Do you think as long as you beckon, I must wag my tail back to you? I snorted from my nose. Put away your CEO logic, sorry, I don't buy it. He was rebuked until his face turned green and white. This was probably the first time someone scolded him so mercilessly to his face. I was indeed blinded by lard. He lowered his posture, voice with regret, I admit I'm a bastard, I admit I was wrong. But Evelyn, between us, not all are bad memories, right? He wanted to play the emotion card again. Forgot? When we just married, you liked the Xiaolongbao from that shop in the South City. I got up at 5 a.m. every day to queue for you. Forgot? Your period cramps, I held you, warmed you all night. Forgot? Stop. I interrupted, Adrian, your memory is really good. Then do you remember who, when I had a high fever, took Vivian's call and immediately went out, leaving me alone at home? Do you remember who, after I carefully prepared the anniversary dinner, accompanied Vivian to a midnight movie, making me wait until the dishes were cold? Do you remember who, when I crashed to save you and lay in hospital, pointed to your brother and told me to get lost? With each sentence I said, his face paled more. In the end, he was bloodless. Stop. He closed his eyes painfully. Why not say? I stared at him, aren't these also our memories? How come you remember the good ones, and want to wipe out the bad? Adrian, you're too selfish. You only remember your trivial efforts, but ignore the huge pain I endured. What qualifies you for my forgiveness? My phone had been quietly returned by the housekeeper at some point. I took it out and opened a contact. It was my senior from college, now a highly accomplished lawyer. I sent him a message, we can begin. After sending it, I tucked the phone away. Adrian seemed to sense something, his face changed greatly. What did you do? I didn't answer. In less than 10 minutes, his phone rang crazily. It was his assistant. He answered, the other end had the assistant's panicked voice. Adrian. Bad news. Our company has a huge tax scandal exposed. Now the internet is full of our negative news, stock price is starting to plummet. Adrian's body swayed, almost unsteady. He suddenly looked up at me, eyes full of disbelief. You did it? I looked at him, slowly revealing a smile. I said, I'm not threatening you. These years, although a housewife, I didn't completely abandon my profession. I studied finance. I've seen Adrian's company accounts. Those shady methods, I know better than anyone. I was just waiting for the right timing. Now, the time has come. Adrian's phone rang again, one after another, all from the company. He frantically answered, his face getting uglier. Looking at me, his eyes went from shock to anger, to final powerlessness. Just as he was overwhelmed, the villa door was pushed open again. This time, several uniformed police entered. The leading officer walked to Adrian, showed credentials. Mr. Adrian, we received a report, you're suspected of illegal detention. Please come with us for investigation. Adrian completely froze. He slowly turned to look at me. I leaned on the sofa, raised my phone to him. Hello? 911? I've been kidnapped. Adrian was taken by the police. As he left, he kept looking back at me, his eyes complex like a tangled web. Shock, anger, confusion, and a trace of embarrassment and defeat I'd never seen. He probably never dreamed that the Evelyn who once obeyed him, loved him to the dust, would personally send him to the police station. Finally, only me left in the villa. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking at the bright sunshine outside, took a deep breath. The air of freedom is so good. My lawyer senior arrived soon. He brought the formal divorce agreement, and the evidence I asked him to collect about Adrian's marital infidelity, cold violence against me, and how Vivian deliberately instigated our relationship. Evelyn, are you sure? Senior looked at me. Once these go public, Adrian and Gu Group will face catastrophe. I'm sure. I took the files, without looking, signed my name on the last page. What he owes me, he should repay. In the following days, a city's finance and entertainment sections were dominated by Gu family news. Gu Group tax scandal, stock price plummeted. CEO Adrian suspected of illegal detention, under police investigation. Then, explosive news of Adrian's affair with childhood sweetheart Vivian during marriage, and long-term cold violence against wife, was exposed by an anonymous account, with various HD photos and recordings. Overnight, Adrian turned from favored son to universally condemned scumbag. Vivian wasn't better. Her labels as homewrecker and vicious green tea were stuck fast, eggs thrown at her outside, social accounts cursed to closure. I looked at the news on phone calm. This is just the beginning. Adrian was released soon, insufficient evidence for illegal detention. After release, he came to find me first. He stood at villa door, blocked by new bodyguards I hired. He looked more haggard than last time, eyes full of red veins, exuding decadence. Evelyn. Come out. Let's talk. He shouted outside. I sat on living room sofa, watching him via monitor, unmoved. I know I was wrong. Evelyn. Come out and see me. Give back the company. Give everything back. Then I'll give you anything. I'll leave with nothing. I beg you. His voice carried sobs, full of despair. The former Adrian was so superior, so spirited. When had he been so humble? But watching, I only felt irony. If only he knew today, why bother back then? He shouted for a long time until his voice was hoarse. Seeing I wouldn't show, he finally gave up. He leaned on the cold gate, like an abandoned dog. I turned off the monitor. In the afternoon, I received an unexpected call. From the hospital. Miss Evelyn? I'm Mr. Collins' caregiver. He woke up. My heart jumped. Colin woke up. When I rushed to the hospital, Colin's ward was full of people. Gu family elders, doctors, nurses. Adrian was there too. He stood at the outermost, eyes lit seeing me, wanted to come forward, but nailed in place by something, dared not move. I ignored him and walked straight through the crowd to the hospital bed. Colin had already sat up. Though his face remained pale, his eyes had regained their clarity. Seeing me, he paused, momentarily stunned. You are? His voice still sounded weak. Before I could answer, a Gu elder, Adrian's aunt, spoke. Colin, you finally woke. Do you know, during your coma, it was your wife Evelyn caring for you. She's a good child, devoted, never leaving. Colin heard, looked at me again, eyes with inquiry and gratitude. Wife. I was about to explain, but Adrian suddenly rushed over. He grabbed my wrist, pulled me behind him, like protecting his treasure. Facing Colin on the bed, he said word by word, she's not your wife. She's my wife, Adrian's. The whole ward instantly silent. Everyone looked at us three with shock. Colin frowned, seeming to recall something. At that moment, the silent Colin suddenly lifted his head, gaze passing Adrian, falling on my face. His eyes were clear, clean. Looking at me, he slowly said a sentence. I remember you. On the accident day, you dragged me out of the car. And, Vivian, she cut my brake line. Colin's words were like a depth charge, exploding the ward. Everyone was stunned. Adrian was as if struck by lightning, whole body stiff. He turned sharply, looking at his brother, eyes full of disbelief. What did you say? I said, Colin's voice not loud but exceptionally clear, my accident wasn't accidental. It was Vivian. He looked at me, eyes with apology. That day, she asked me out, said important matter. I refused, she tampered with my car. Later, car out of control, it was you, risking danger to save me. Sorry, for misunderstanding you so long. The truth was revealed in such an unexpected way. More direct and powerful than any evidence I prepared. Adrian's face instantly turned ashen. He staggered back 2 steps, gaze switching between me and Colin, finally fixed on my face. That look had shock, regret, pain, and thick despair. He finally understood how wrong he was. The person he hated and tormented for 3 years was his brother's savior. And the woman he cherished was the real culprit. Is there anything more ironic in the world? No. Impossible. He murmured, seeming unable to accept. Vivian, why did she do this? Because she wanted to marry you. Colin answered coldly, and I knew some of her secrets, became her stumbling block. So, she wanted to eliminate me. Adrian's body trembled violently. He understood everything. Vivian's every instigation, weakness, inversion of right and wrong, linked into a complete chain of evidence. And he was the stupidest fool played by her. He turned sharply, rushed out of the ward. I knew he went to find Vivian. A good show was about to start. Others in the ward, their looks at me changed. From sympathy, to admiration, to now guilt. Adrian's aunt came over, holding my hand, full of apology. Evelyn, it's our Gu family, sorry to you. We were blind, trusted that venomous woman, made you suffer so much. I pulled out my hand, said lightly, it's all past. I don't want any ties with Gu family anymore. I looked at Colin, nodded. Rest well, I'll go first. Wait. He called me. I turned back. Thank you. He said sincerely, not just for me, but for my brother. You made him see the truth. I tugged my mouth, didn't speak. Making him see truth was never my goal. I just wanted him to suffer. Let him taste betrayal by most trusted, abandonment by most loved. I left the hospital. Soon, news came of Vivian taken by police. Attempted murder, plus Gu tax issues, she'll probably spend life in prison. And Adrian, after personally sending Vivian in, disappeared completely. Ignored company, didn't return home. Until a week later, he appeared at my villa door again. More disheveled than ever. Stubbly, clothes messy, reeking of alcohol and despair. He knelt outside, through the cold iron gate, calling my name repeatedly. Evelyn. I was wrong. I know I was wrong. Let me see you, okay? Hit me, scold me, anything. Beg you, don't abandon me. His voice hoarse, with sobs, like a lost child. I stood at the second-floor window, looking at him coldly. My lawyer senior beside me asked, call police? I shook head. No need. I picked up phone, dialed Colin. Hello, it's me. The overseas branch job you mentioned before, is it still available? On the other end, Colin's voice gentle and firm. Of course. Reserved for you anytime. Good. Looking at the man kneeling downstairs, crying messily, I slowly said, book me the fastest ticket to New York. The day I left was sunny. I told no one, just dragged a simple suitcase. Car to airport, as I prepared to get off, saw a familiar figure. Adrian. He somehow got the news, chased here. He rushed over, blocked the car door tightly, not letting me down. His eyes red, full of veins, whole person on collapse edge. Evelyn, don't go. His voice raspy like sandpaper. Beg you, don't leave me. I sat in car, calmly looking at him. Adrian, move. I won't. He stubbornly shook head, hands on car door, unless you promise not to go. We're divorced. I reminded him of the fact. We can remarry. He said urgently, we'll remarry immediately. Evelyn, I'll give you everything. Goo Corp, my entire fortune, all to you. As long as you stay. Looking at him, I suddenly laughed. Adrian, do you still think money solves everything? He was stunned. You think I did all this for your money, for goo? I shook head. You're wrong. What I wanted was never these. I wanted only a husband who loves me, a warm home. But you couldn't give me. I can. He grabbed my hand, like last straw. I can now. Evelyn, now I love only you. My heart, eyes, all you. Believe me. Too late. I gently pulled out my hand. Adrian, too late. The Evelyn who loved you was killed by you 3 years ago, in your repeated indifference and hurts. When you left me alone at home with fever for Vivian, she died a bit. When you made me guard cold dishes alone on anniversary for Vivian, she died more. When to save yourself, you let me crash, and after my amnesia pointed to your brother as my husband, she died completely. Looking at his gradually ashen face, I continued, so, no need to beg her forgiveness. Because dead people don't speak. His body swayed, tears rolled down without warning. A man in his 30s, once dominating business, now cried like a child. No. Not. He choked, incoherent. Evelyn, don't say that. At that time. Do you know? I interrupted, voice calm without ripple. I was once grateful for that accident, for that amnesia. Because it gave me a legitimate reason to stop loving you. The months caring for Colin were the most relaxed, happiest in 3 years. Because I finally didn't need to focus on you, expect your pitiful gentleness, hurt from your word or look. I finally can be myself again. So, Adrian, let me go. Let yourself go too. After saying, I no longer looked at him, said to driver, drive. Driver glanced at the distraught man outside, hesitated, but started the car. Adrian was dragged by the car, staggered steps, finally fell. From rear view, his figure got smaller, blurrier, until unseen. I didn't look back. Plane took off, through clouds. Looking at blue sky outside, I finally smiled from heart. Adrian, goodbye. No, never see again. The woman called Evelyn, her first half-life was a grand and tragic solo play. And now, she's going to live her second half. No love, no hate, only herself.